I've always believed that a man should be measured by the calluses on his hands and the integrity in his heart. My name is Frank Donovan, and at 63, I've spent over 4 decades building houses for other people while carefully constructing my own life brick by brick. My late wife Margaret used to say I was stubborn as the foundations I poured, and maybe she was right. That stubbornness is probably what kept me going after she passed from cancer 8 years ago, leaving me with our daughter Claire in the modest 3-bedroom home in Lakewood, Colorado that we'd paid off through years of careful saving. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was enjoying my retirement routine, black coffee, the Denver Post spread across my kitchen table, and the satisfaction of not having to rush anywhere. The kitchen was the heart of our home, nothing fancy, oak cabinets I'd refinished myself, laminate countertops that had seen 20 years of family meals, and Margaret's collection of rooster figurines that I couldn't bring myself to pack away. Through the window, I could see the mountains in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in late May. The phone rang at 9:17. I remember checking my watch because calls that early usually meant something was wrong. "Mr. Donovan?" The voice was professional, female. "This is Sandra Wilkins from First Colorado Bank. I'm calling about your loan application." I felt my forehead wrinkle. "I think you have the wrong number. I haven't applied for any loans." There was a pause on the line. "You are Frank Donovan of 1472 Pinecrest Drive?" "Yes, that's me." "And you didn't recently apply for a home equity line of credit for $175,000 against your property?" The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. "Absolutely not." Sandra's voice shifted, becoming more cautious. "Mr. Donovan, I'm looking at an application submitted yesterday with your name, social security number, and property information. It has your signature on it." My heart pounded against my ribs like a hammer. "My signature? That's impossible. The application was submitted by your son-in-law, Brian Miller. He indicated he had your permission to act as your representative." The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways. Brian. Claire's husband of 5 years. The investment broker with the too-white smile and the BMW he couldn't quite afford. The man who called me Pops despite my repeated corrections. "Mr. Donovan?" Sandra prompted. "I never authorized this," I said, my voice hardening. "I never signed anything." "I see." Her tone was careful, measured. "In that case, sir, I strongly recommend you come into our main branch today. We need to discuss this matter in person." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table. The newspaper headlines blurred before my eyes. My mind raced back through recent interactions with Brian and Claire. They'd been over for Sunday dinner just 2 days ago. Brian had insisted on helping me clean up afterward, shooing me to the living room. Had he been searching for documents? Taking photos of my personal information? Claire was my only child. After Margaret died, she'd been my rock. When she married Brian, I'd welcomed him into our family despite my reservations about his flashy lifestyle and the way his eyes never quite met mine when he talked about his work. For Claire's sake, I'd bitten my tongue when he'd made comments about my little house or suggested I wasn't managing my retirement savings optimally. Now this. Using my name, my home, the home I'd built with Margaret, for a loan I knew nothing about. I drove to the bank in a fog of disbelief that gradually burned away under the heat of rising anger. The bank's interior was cool and quiet, all beige walls and fake plants. Sandra turned out to be a woman about my age with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain. She led me to a private office where she laid out the loan application. "That's not my signature," I said immediately, staring at the crude approximation of my handwriting. "Not even close." Sandra nodded, her expression grave. "I suspected as much." There were other red flags. "The email address for correspondence doesn't match our records for you," and when I called the phone number listed, a woman answered claiming to be your secretary. "I'm a retired contractor," I said flatly. I've never had a secretary in my life. She slid the papers into a folder. Mr. Donovan, this appears to be a clear case of attempted fraud. As a bank, we're obligated to report this to the authorities. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. My mind was racing. Before you do that, I need to understand exactly what happened. And I hesitated, thinking of Claire. And I need to handle some personal matters first. Sandra studied me for a long moment. I can delay filing the report until the end of business tomorrow. But not longer than that. I nodded, grateful for the small reprieve. Can you tell me what would have happened if you hadn't called me? If the application had been processed? The funds would have been deposited into the account specified here. She pointed to a bank account number on the form. And you would have been legally responsible for repaying $175,000 plus interest, secured against your home. The magnitude of what Brian had attempted settled over me like a heavy cloak. If this Sandra hadn't been thorough, if she hadn't decided to make that verification call, I could have lost everything. One more thing, I said. Please don't contact the number on that form. Don't let anyone know we've spoken. On the drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Questions churned in my mind. Was Claire involved? Did she know what her husband was doing? I couldn't believe my daughter would participate in stealing from me, but the thought of her betrayal was a knife twisting in my gut. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed evidence. Confronting Brian directly would only give him a chance to cover his tracks or spin some elaborate explanation. No, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. When I got home, I went straight to my home office and powered up my old desktop computer. Despite Brian's jokes about my dinosaur technology, I knew my way around well enough. I pulled up my bank statements, credit reports, and mortgage documents, checking for any unusual activity. Everything looked normal, but the attempted home equity loan had clearly been just the beginning. I shuddered to think what might have happened if it had gone through. Next, I called my old friend Mike Reynolds. We'd worked construction together for 30 years before he moved into home security. If anyone could help me gather evidence without raising alarms, it was Mike. Frank, his gruff voice answered on the third ring. Been a while. How's retirement treating you? Not as peaceful as advertised, I replied. Listen, Mike, I need your help with something sensitive. Can you come by today? 2 hours later, Mike was sitting at my kitchen table, his expression grim as I explained the situation. Jesus, Frank, he muttered when I finished. Your own son-in-law. I need to know if he's done anything else, I said. And I need proof that will stand up if this goes to court. Mike nodded, scratching his gray-stubbled chin. We'll need to monitor your accounts, set up some basic surveillance here at the house, and maybe get access to any shared family documents. He gave me a serious look. What about Claire? You think she's in on it? The question hit me like a physical blow. I don't want to believe it. But I need to know. All right, Mike said, reaching for his phone. I've got a buddy who works digital forensics. We'll keep this quiet, just between us for now. By evening, my home had been subtly transformed into a surveillance hub. Small cameras monitored my office and the areas where I kept financial documents. My computer had new security software that would track any attempts to access my accounts. Mike's forensic friend had even set up a system to monitor my credit report in real time. Now we wait, Mike said as he prepared to leave. Act normal. If Brian or Claire come over, don't give any indication you suspect anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Claire as a little girl, her gap-toothed smile when I built her a treehouse, her determined expression when I taught her to change a tire. How had we ended up here? The next morning, I called Claire. My finger hesitated over her number, but I forced myself to press dial. Dad? Her voice was bright, normal. Everything okay? You don't usually call on weekdays. Just fine, sweetheart, I lied, my throat tight. I was wondering if you and Brian might come over for dinner tonight. I've been thinking about some financial planning, and I'd appreciate Brian's professional opinion. There was a brief pause. Sure, Dad. That sounds great. Brian's actually been wanting to talk to you about some investment opportunities. We'll bring wine. After we hung up, I sat heavily on the edge of my bed. Investment opportunities. The words tasted like ash. I spent the day preparing, not just dinner but my approach. I needed to play this carefully, to give Brian enough rope without revealing what I knew. Mike called to confirm all our surveillance was operational and reminded me to steer any sensitive conversations toward my office, where the audio would be clearest. At precisely 6:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door to my daughter and the man who had tried to steal my home. Dad! Claire embraced me warmly, her blonde hair, so like her mother's, brushing against my cheek. She looked tired, I noticed, with faint shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Brian stood behind her, all confident smiles in his business casual attire. He thrust a bottle of expensive-looking red wine at me. Pops. Good to see you. Claire says you want to talk finances? Perfect timing. I accepted the wine with a forced smile. Perfect timing indeed. Dinner was lasagna, Margaret's recipe, with garlic bread and salad. I watched them both carefully as we ate. Claire seemed normal if slightly distracted, asking about my garden and the neighborhood. Brian was more animated than usual, steering the conversation toward money at every opportunity. Real estate's really heating up in your area, he mentioned casually as he reached for a second helping. Houses like yours are appreciating like crazy. You're sitting on a gold mine, Pops. Is that right? I kept my voice neutral. I hadn't thought about it much. This has always just been home. That's the problem with your generation, Brian said with a too loud laugh. You don't see opportunities. That equity could be working for you instead of just sitting there. Claire shot him a look I couldn't quite interpret. Brian. He waved a dismissive hand. I'm just saying, there are options. Better options than letting a paid-off house just exist. After dinner, I suggested we move to my office to discuss the financial planning I'd mentioned. As we settled in, me behind my desk, Claire and Brian in the visitor chairs, I could feel the weight of the hidden cameras recording everything. So, I began. I've been thinking about my will, estate planning, that sort of thing. Brian leaned forward, suddenly all business. Smart move, Pops. Very responsible. I want to make sure Claire is taken care of course, I continued, watching his eyes light up. But I'm also considering some major expenses coming up. Maybe even a reverse mortgage to fund them. A reverse mortgage? Brian frowned. That's generally not advisable. There are better options for accessing your home equity. Like what? I asked innocently. A home equity line of credit would give you flexibility without the downsides of a reverse mortgage, he said, speaking faster now. In fact, I've been looking into some excellent rates. I could help you with the application process. I noticed Claire's brow furrow slightly. You never mentioned you were thinking about taking out loans against the house, Dad. Before I could respond, Brian jumped in. It wouldn't be a loan in the traditional sense, Claire. Just accessing value that's already there. He turned back to me. Actually, I've already done some preliminary research. With your credit score and the property value, you could easily qualify for $175,000. There it was. The exact amount from the fraudulent application. That's a very specific number, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Something flickered in his eyes, caution, perhaps, but his smile never wavered. Just an example based on estimated equity. We'd need to get a proper appraisal, of course. Of course, I echoed. And who would help manage this money once I had access to it? Brian's smile widened. I'd be happy to help with that, Pops. In fact, I've been developing an investment portfolio that would be perfect for someone in your position. Very safe, but with excellent returns. I nodded thoughtfully, as though considering his offer. I'd like to see more details about that. Maybe you could email me some information? Absolutely, he said, clearly pleased with how the conversation was going. I'll send everything over tomorrow. Claire had been quiet, watching our exchange with a slight frown. Now she spoke up. Dad, are you sure about this? The house means so much to you. It's where we. Her voice caught slightly. It's where we lived with Mom. For a moment, genuine emotion overwhelmed my act. Yes, it is. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of complicity in her husband's scheme. All I saw was concern. Brian put his hand on Claire's knee. Your dad's making a smart financial decision, honey. The house isn't going anywhere, he's just putting its value to work. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of financial talk. Brian grew increasingly enthusiastic, laying out scenarios where my home equity could generate significant returns through his proposed investments. I nodded and asked questions, playing the role of an interested but cautious potential client. All the while, the cameras whirred silently, capturing every word, every gesture. When they finally left around 10 p.m., I stood on the porch watching their taillights disappear down the street. The night air was cool against my face, carrying the scent of lilacs from the bush Margaret had planted years ago. What are you up to, Brian? I murmured to the empty street. And how deep does this go? The next morning, I met with Mike to review the footage. We sat in his cluttered home office, watching the previous night's conversation on his computer screen. He's not even subtle about it, Mike said, shaking his head as we listened to Brian discuss the specific amount of $175,000. And that bit about the investment portfolio? Classic setup. I nodded grimly. The question is, does Claire know? We watched the recording again, focusing on my daughter's reactions. Her surprise at my mention of loans against the house seemed genuine, as did her emotional response about the home's connection to her mother. If I had to guess, Mike said, she's in the dark. But we need more. What about the bank account on the loan application? I asked. Can we find out whose name is on it? Mike made a call to his forensic friend, who promised to look into it discreetly. While we waited, I checked my email. Sure enough, Brian had already sent information about his proposed investment opportunity, a complex-looking prospectus for something called Midwest Development Partners. Send me that, Mike said, and I forwarded him the email. My guy can check if this is even legitimate. By afternoon, we had more pieces of the puzzle. The bank account listed on the fraudulent loan application was in Brian's name only, not a joint account with Claire. And Midwest Development Partners turned out to be a recently formed LLC with minimal public information available. Classic shell company setup, Mike's friend explained over speakerphone. Just enough paperwork to look legitimate to a casual observer, but practically no actual business operations. If I had to guess, money going in would quickly be transferred elsewhere. The evidence was mounting, but I still couldn't bring myself to involve the authorities without being certain of Claire's innocence. I needed to see how far Brian would go, and I needed to protect my daughter. That evening, I received a call from Brian. Frank, he said, dropping the usual pops for a more serious tone. I've been thinking about our conversation. I may have a way to streamline this whole process for you. I'm listening, I said, recording the call as Mike had shown me. There's some paperwork involved with the HELOC application, but I could handle all of that for you. Save you the hassle of going to the bank, dealing with all the red tape. His voice was smooth, practiced. I just need you to sign a few forms. That's very thoughtful, I replied. When were you thinking? I could swing by tomorrow afternoon if that works for you. We arranged for him to come at 2 p.m. After hanging up, I immediately called Mike. He's making his move, I told him. Coming over tomorrow with forms for me to sign. Perfect, Mike said. We'll be ready. The next day, I prepared carefully. Mike arrived early, checking all our surveillance equipment and setting up a new camera focused specifically on my dining room table, where I planned to have Brian present his paperwork. Then Mike retreated to my bedroom, where he could monitor everything in real time without being seen. At exactly 2 p.m., Brian's BMW pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him straighten his tie before approaching the door. I took a deep breath and went to let him in. Frank. He was all smiles, carrying a leather portfolio. Thanks for making time for this. I think you're going to be very pleased with the options I've put together. I led him to the dining room, where I'd cleared the table except for a pot of coffee and 2 mugs. Coffee? Black, thanks. He set his portfolio down and began extracting documents. I've got some great news. Based on my industry connections, I've been able to secure pre-approval for your home equity line. All we need is your signature on a few things, and we can get the ball rolling immediately. I watched as he arranged papers on the table, noting how he kept them slightly angled away from me. That was fast, I commented, pouring his coffee. Usually these things take longer, don't they? He waved a dismissive hand. Normally, yes. But I've worked with these lenders before. They trust my judgment. He slid a document toward me. This is just the basic application. I've filled out most of it for you. I picked it up, making a show of reading it carefully. It was indeed a home equity line application, but with several key details conveniently left blank, including the amount requested and the destination account number. Seems incomplete, I noted. Just standard procedure, Brian said smoothly. The final numbers will be determined after the appraisal. I just need your signature on the last page to authorize the process. I flipped to the last page, where a sticky arrow pointed to a signature line. The fine print above it was dense and nearly impossible to read without a magnifying glass. What exactly am I authorizing here? I asked, playing dumb. Brian's smile remained fixed, but I detected a flicker of impatience in his eyes. It's just permission for the bank to access your credit information and begin the appraisal process. All very standard. I pretended to sign, but deliberately made an illegible scrawl that looked nothing like my signature. There you go. He quickly took the paper, barely glancing at the signature before placing it in his portfolio. Next, he produced a form that looked more official, with a bank logo at the top. Now, this one is the authorization for fund disbursement. Once approved, where would you like the money deposited? I haven't really thought about it, I said. Doesn't it just go into my checking account? Brian shook his head. That's not the most efficient approach from a tax perspective. I'd recommend setting up a dedicated account for these funds. He slid another form across the table. This authorizes the creation of a new account and specifies where the initial disbursement should go. I looked down at the form. The account information was already filled in, the same account number from the fraudulent application Sandra had shown me. Whose account is this? I asked directly. Brian's composure slipped for just a moment. It's a management account I've set up specifically for this investment opportunity. It streamlines the process. So the money goes directly to you, not to me, I clarified. Not to me personally, he said quickly. To the investment vehicle. It's more efficient this way, saves you having to write checks or make transfers. I nodded slowly, as if considering this. And how much exactly are we talking about here? The pre-approval is for $175,000, he said, watching me carefully. Which is an excellent amount for the investment strategy I've developed. I sat back in my chair, making a show of thinking it over. That's a lot of money to secure against my home. It's your money, Frank, he said, leaning forward earnestly. It's just sitting there in your home equity, doing nothing. This way, it works for you. And for you? I couldn't resist asking. What do you get out of this arrangement? He gave a practiced laugh. Well, as your financial advisor, I'd take a small management fee. Standard industry practice. But my real satisfaction comes from helping family. He gestured around the room. I want to see you enjoy your retirement, maybe travel a bit, upgrade some things around here. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Brian presenting more documents, each one designed to grant him control over my assets in some way. I signed several with the same illegible scrawl, watching as he quickly tucked each one away without scrutiny. Finally, he gathered his materials. I think we've covered everything for today. I'll submit these right away and be in touch about next steps. He stood, extending his hand. You're making a smart decision, Frank. This is going to change your financial future. I shook his hand, noting the cold dampness of his palm despite his confident demeanor. I'm sure it will. After Brian left, Mike emerged from the bedroom, his expression thunderous. We've got him cold, he said. Clear intent to defraud, documented from multiple angles. The way he's having you sign incomplete forms, the redirection of funds to his personal account, it's textbook. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. But is Claire involved? I still don't see evidence either way. There's one way to find out, Mike said grimly. We need to follow the money. Let these applications go through, see where the funds end up, and monitor who accesses them. I shook my head. Too risky. If that money leaves the country or gets tied up in his shell company, I might never see it again. Mike considered this. Fair point. Then we need to get Claire alone, show her what we've found, and gauge her reaction. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The following afternoon, Claire called me. Dad, I forgot to grab my gardening gloves last time we were over. Is it okay if I swing by to pick them up? I'm planting those tomato seedlings you gave me. Of course, sweetheart, I said, my heart heavy. I'll be here all day. When she arrived an hour later, I led her to the kitchen where I'd made tea, her favorite Earl Grey in the floral teacups that had been her mother's. Thanks, Dad, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Brian's been working late all week, so I figured I'd get some gardening done to keep busy. I studied my daughter's face, the blue eyes so like her mother's, the determined set of her jaw that she'd inherited from me. Claire, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's important. She must have heard the gravity in my voice because she set down her cup, her expression becoming concerned. What is it? Are you okay? I'm fine, I assured her. But I need to show you something, and I need you to be honest with me about what you know. I led her to my office, where I had prepared a folder of evidence, the original fraudulent loan application Sandra had shown me, printouts of the forms Brian had brought over, and still images from our surveillance showing Brian's deception. Claire's confusion turned to shock as she paged through the documents. I don't understand. What is all this? Brian has been trying to take out a loan against my house without my knowledge, I explained gently. He forged my signature on an application for $175,000. When that didn't work, he tried to get me to sign incomplete forms that would accomplish the same thing. Her face drained of color. That's impossible. He wouldn't. She trailed off, her eyes fixed on the loan application with the forged signature. This can't be right. The bank called me directly to verify, which is how I found out, I continued. Claire, I need to know, did you have any knowledge of this? No. Her head snapped up, eyes flashing with hurt that I would even ask. How could you think I'd be part of something like this? This is your home, Dad. Our home. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I had to ask, sweetheart. I'm sorry. She looked back down at the documents, her initial shock giving way to something harder. Show me everything. For the next hour, I walked her through all the evidence we had gathered, the shell company Brian had created, the bank account in his name alone, the deceptive investment prospectus, and the recordings of his attempts to manipulate me into signing over control of my assets. Claire sat in stunned silence through most of it, occasionally asking a sharp, focused question that told me she was processing everything with the keen intelligence she'd always possessed. When we finished, she sat back in her chair, her face a mask of controlled fury. I knew we were having financial problems, she said finally, her voice low. Brian lost a big client last year and things have been tight. He's been stressed, secretive about money. But this... She gestured at the evidence spread before us. I never imagined he'd do something like this. Financial problems? I repeated, concerned. How bad? Claire's laugh was bitter. Apparently worse than I thought. We had to take out a second mortgage 6 months ago. Brian said it was temporary, just until some investments paid off. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The irony is, I've been working overtime at the hospital to help with our bills, while he's been. She couldn't finish the sentence. I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in mine. None of this is your fault, Claire. What are you going to do? She asked after a moment. Are you going to press charges? It was the question I'd been wrestling with since discovering Brian's scheme. I don't know yet. If I report the forgery to the police, Brian could face serious jail time. But he's still your husband. Claire was quiet for a long moment, then said, I need some time to think. And I need to decide what I'm going to do about my marriage. She squeezed my hand. But whatever you decide about legal action, I'll support you. What he tried to do was unforgivable. After Claire left, I called Mike to update him. She didn't know, I told him. And she's furious. Not surprising, Mike replied. So what's your next move? I considered the options. Going to the police would be the most straightforward path, but it would also be the most destructive to Claire's life, regardless of what happened with her marriage. There had to be another way to ensure justice without creating more casualties. I'm going to talk to Sandra at the bank tomorrow, I decided. She needs to know what's happening before Brian tries another angle. The next morning, I met with Sandra in the same private office as before. I brought copies of all our evidence, which she reviewed with professional thoroughness. This is extremely serious, she said when she finished. Attempted bank fraud, identity theft, forgery, we're obligated to report this to federal authorities. I understand, I said. But before you do that, I'd like to propose an alternative approach. Sandra raised an eyebrow. I'm listening, but I should warn you that my flexibility is limited by banking regulations. I'm not asking you to ignore anything, I assured her. Just to coordinate with me on timing. I want to confront Brian with representatives from the bank present. I want him to understand exactly what he's done and what the consequences could be. And then, she prompted. And then we'll proceed with whatever legal steps are necessary, I said. But I want a chance to protect my daughter as much as possible first. Sandra considered this. I can arrange a meeting here at the bank. We'll have our security and legal team present. She gave me an appraising look. You're being more merciful than many would be in your position. Not merciful, I corrected her. Strategic. The trap was set for the following Monday. Sandra called Brian directly, explaining that there were some questions about Frank Donovan's loan application that required his presence as the submitting financial advisor. Brian, apparently not suspecting anything amiss, agreed to the meeting. I spent the weekend helping Claire move essential belongings to my house. She had confronted Brian with some of what we knew, resulting in an explosive argument that ended with her walking out. Brian had alternated between denial, minimization, and promises to explain everything at the right time. He actually tried to tell me it was all a misunderstanding, Claire said as we carried boxes into my spare bedroom. That he was trying to surprise me with an investment opportunity that would secure our future. Did you believe him? I asked carefully. She snorted. Not for a second. Not after seeing those documents. She set down a box with more force than necessary. 15 years as a nurse has given me a pretty good radar for when someone's lying through their teeth. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that seemed fitting for the day of reckoning. Claire had decided to come with me to the bank, despite my concerns about how difficult it might be for her. I need to see this through, she said firmly as we drove downtown. I need to hear him explain himself. The bank's conference room was imposing in its corporate sterility, a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, abstract art on the walls, and a view of downtown Denver through tinted windows. Sandra was waiting for us along with two men she introduced as Mr. Patel from the legal department and Mr. Ramirez from security. Mr. Miller should be here shortly, Sandra informed us. Everything has been prepared as discussed. We took our seats, Claire and I on one side of the table, the bank representatives on the other, with two empty chairs positioned at the head of the table. The evidence was arranged neatly in folders before each seat. At exactly 10 a.m., Brian was escorted in by a bank employee. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his confidence evident in his stride until he saw Claire and me sitting at the table. His step faltered momentarily, but he quickly recovered, smoothing his expression into professional neutrality. "Good morning," he said, taking one of the empty chairs. "I understand there are some questions about an application?" Sandra's smile was polite but cold. "Yes, Mr. Miller. We have concerns about a home equity line of credit application you submitted for Frank Donovan." She opened her folder. Specifically, we're concerned about the authenticity of the signature and the authorization. Brian glanced at me, then back to Sandra. There must be some misunderstanding. Frank and I have been discussing his financial options, but everything has been above board. Then perhaps you can explain this, Sandra said, sliding a document across the table, the original fraudulent application with the forged signature. Brian barely glanced at it. Yes, Frank authorized me to begin the application process as his financial advisor. I have a signed consent form. I spoke for the first time. No, Brian. I never authorized you to apply for any loans in my name. And we have evidence that the signature on this application was forged, Sandra added. Brian's facade began to crack. Frank, we talked about this. Maybe not in so many words, but you expressed interest in leveraging your home equity. Stop lying, Claire cut in, her voice trembling with anger. We have everything, Brian. The forged documents. The recordings of you trying to trick my father into signing incomplete forms. The shell company you created to funnel the money into. The color drained from Brian's face as he realized the extent of what we knew. His eyes darted around the room, perhaps looking for an escape route, but Mr. Ramirez shifted subtly in his chair, a reminder of the security presence. This is all a huge misunderstanding, Brian tried again, his voice less certain now. I was trying to help Frank maximize his assets. Yes, I may have taken some shortcuts with the paperwork, but my intentions were. Your intentions, I interrupted, were to steal $175,000 from me by taking out a loan against my home without my knowledge. A home that I spent 40 years paying for. I leaned forward. A home where I raised my daughter and lived with my wife until she died. Brian swallowed hard. Frank, Mr. Donovan to you, I corrected him coldly. Mr. Patel from the legal department cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, the evidence we've reviewed indicates multiple federal offenses, including bank fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. These carry potential penalties of up to 30 years in federal prison and fines up to $1 million. Brian's professional demeanor crumbled entirely. Wait, no, you can't be serious. This is a family matter, a misunderstanding between in-laws. It became a legal matter the moment you submitted fraudulent documents to a federally insured bank, Mr. Patel continued impassively. Brian turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Frank, Mr. Donovan, please. We can work this out. I admit I made a terrible mistake, but jail? You wouldn't do that to Claire, to your family. I looked at my son-in-law, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time, not the confident financial advisor with the expensive suits and practiced smile, but a cornered man who had gambled with other people's lives and lost. You're right about one thing, I said evenly. I am thinking about my family, about Claire, and about protecting what I've worked my entire life to build. I glanced at my daughter, who gave me a small nod. That's why I'm prepared to offer you an alternative to immediate criminal charges. Hope flickered in Brian's eyes. Anything. Name it. I slid a document across the table, one that Mike and I had prepared with the help of a lawyer friend. Full financial disclosure. Every account, every investment, every debt. A signed confession of what you attempted to do. Divorce papers giving Claire equitable division of legitimate assets. And your resignation from your investment firm with a full disclosure to them of your actions. Brian stared at the document, then at me. And if I sign? Then the bank will delay filing criminal charges pending your compliance with these terms, Sandra stated. But make no mistake, Mr. Miller, this information will remain on file. Any attempt to defraud another financial institution or individual will result in immediate prosecution with this evidence. The next hour was excruciating for everyone, but especially for Claire, as Brian provided details of their true financial situation. His investment business had been struggling for years. He had gambling debts. Their lifestyle, the luxury car, the expensive vacations, the country club membership had been financed largely through credit cards and loans. The second mortgage on their house was approaching foreclosure. I was desperate, Brian admitted, unable to look at Claire. This deal was going to fix everything. What deal? Claire asked, her voice hollow. Stealing from my father? Brian shook his head. The investment was real. Midwest Development Partners has a commercial project breaking ground next month. If I could secure investment capital, my return would have cleared all our debts with profit to spare. And if the investment failed? I asked. He had no answer for that. By early afternoon, Brian had signed everything: the confession, the financial disclosure, the divorce papers, and a resignation letter to his firm. Mr. Patel explained that the bank would be contacting regulatory authorities about Brian's professional conduct, which would likely result in him losing his investment advisor license. As we prepared to leave, Brian made one last plea to Claire. I know I've destroyed your trust, but you have to believe I never meant to hurt you. Everything I did was to try to fix our problems. Claire looked at her husband of 5 years with a mixture of pain and pity. The problem, Brian, was that you chose to lie instead of telling me the truth. You chose to steal from my father instead of facing reality. She took off her wedding ring and placed it on the table. I would have stood by you through financial problems. I would have worked extra shifts, cut expenses, sold the house, whatever it took. But I can't stand by someone who would steal from my family. For the first time, Brian seemed to truly understand what he had lost. It wasn't just money or his career, but something far more valuable: integrity, trust, and the love of a good woman. As Claire and I walked out of the bank into the bright Colorado sunshine, she took a deep breath. What now, Dad? I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders. Now we go home. We'll figure out the rest together, one day at a time. In the months that followed, life settled into a new pattern. Claire filed the divorce papers, and Brian didn't contest anything. He moved to Arizona, I heard, to work in his brother's construction business. According to the terms of our agreement, he made restitution payments to Claire for his share of their debts, small amounts that arrived faithfully each month. Claire stayed with me for a while, then found a small apartment closer to the hospital. She threw herself into her nursing work, finding healing in helping others. On Sundays, she still came over for dinner, and sometimes we'd sit in the backyard afterward, watching the mountains turn purple in the evening light. "Do you ever regret not pressing charges?" she asked me one such evening, about a year after everything had happened. I considered the question carefully. No. Justice comes in many forms. Brian lost his career, his marriage, his reputation. He's paying for what he did every day. I looked at my daughter. And this way, you got a clean break without years of legal proceedings. She nodded, understanding. Still, it was a close call. If that bank officer hadn't called you directly. "Sandra," I supplied. "Sandra Wilkins." "Sandra," Claire repeated. If she hadn't been thorough enough to make that call. I thought about how differently things might have turned out, the devastation of discovering a massive loan against my home after the money was already gone, the legal battles that would have ensued, the strain it would have put on Claire. "I've been thinking," I said, changing the subject. "This house is too big for just me. Your mother would want it filled with family." Claire looked at me questioningly. "What would you think about moving back?" "Not into your old room," I added quickly. "We could convert the ground floor den into a private apartment for you. Separate entrance, kitchenette. You'd have your independence, but we'd be under the same roof." "Dad," Claire began, her eyes filling with tears. "Are you sure?" More sure than I'd been about anything in a long time, I told her. This house was built on love and honest work. It's time it was filled with that again. 2 weeks later, Claire and I were planning the renovation of the den, spreading blueprints across the kitchen table just as Margaret and I had done decades earlier when we'd first bought the house. Life had come full circle in a way I hadn't expected. The phone rang, interrupting our discussion about where to put the new bathroom. "Mr. Donovan," a familiar voice said when I answered. "This is Sandra Wilkins from First Colorado Bank." I smiled, remembering the call that had started everything. "Hello, Sandra. What can I do for you?" "Actually," she said, "I'm calling to see if you'd be interested in speaking at a seminar we're hosting for seniors about financial security and fraud prevention. Your experience and how you handled it could be very valuable to others." I looked across the table at Claire, who was penciling in measurements on the blueprint, her face absorbed in the task just as it had been when she'd done homework at this same table as a child. My home was secure. My daughter was safe. The future stretched before us, uncertain but full of possibility. "I'd be happy to," I told Sandra. "Very happy indeed." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.